My introduction to God of War was actually pretty backwards. So, growing up, I was an Xbox kid. I was a Halo fanboy, you know? So, I actually started with Dante's Inferno. I played the shit out of that game. I loved it. And afterward, I kept hearing the same thing from my friends at school that Dante's Inferno was just basically a God of War clone. There was just one problem though, I didn't own a PlayStation. So, like any broke gamer without the right console, back then, I went to YouTube. And eventually, I found the opening of God of War 3. I was watching all the cutscenes, and I watched the Poseidon fight, and I remember, like, specifically, like, how crazy the graphics looked, like, the scale of the boss fights, like, how insane it was. And obviously playing Dante's Inferno, I was like, I have to buy it. Like, what have I been missing, right? So the scale was insane and the combat looked fast. Everything felt larger than life. So I literally went out and bought a PlayStation 3 so I could go through the whole entire God of War series. And I was hooked. So what's crazy is that God of War I fell in love with back then barely resembles the God of War that we have today. And if you watch my recent Assassin's Creed video, this probably sounds familiar. We just looked at what happens when a massive franchise changes so much that you start questioning how much of its original identity is actually left. So I wanted to play with that same idea again, except this time there's a twist, because God of War changed damn near everything too. The combat, the camera, the mythology, the pacing, even Kratos himself. But instead of leaving everyone wondering what the hell happened to God of War, it worked. And not just a little bit either. Somehow, the rage-filled psychopath I watched tearing apart Greek gods became a quiet father trying to teach his son not to become the exact person he used to be. And it still felt like Kratos. So that's what I want to figure out. How did God of War change almost everything without losing what made God of War, God of War? And if you're new here, that's exactly what I do on this channel, and that's what it's becoming all about. The failures, the comebacks, the franchises that changed, the games we grew up with, and the stories behind why they became what they did. I'm putting everything I have into making these documentaries the best that I can every week. And to everybody who's already subscribed, commented, or watched one of these videos while I'm figuring this whole thing out, seriously, thank you. Alright, to understand why changing God of War was such a massive risk, we need to remember just how different old Kratos really was. Old God of War was not subtle, and I mean that as a compliment. The whole thing was built around making you feel like you were the angriest, most dangerous person in the Greek mythology. The combat was fast, and the camera pulled way back so the game could throw these ridiculous environments and giant bosses at you. You weren't just fighting enemies, you were climbing titans, you were ripping apart gods, you were swinging across collapsing structures, and the game was constantly asking, how much bigger can we make this? And somehow it kept finding the answer. That's what hooked me. Coming from Dante's Inferno, God of War felt like somebody had taken that same general style of combat and just pushed it about like 10, 20, 50 times further. The weapons were better, the movement was smoother, the boss fights were on another level, and Kratos himself was basically a walking excuse for the game to keep escalating. He wasn't trying to be reasonable, he wasn't trying to process his trauma, he was just pissed off. And everybody in his way was about to have a really bad day. And honestly, that simplicity worked, because the games knew exactly what they were. They were power fantasies. Big, loud, violent power fantasies. And when you were younger, that shit was incredible. One of the things I remember loving most was how every new era felt like it could reveal something completely insane. You'd think you understood the scale of the game, and then some massive creature would show up and completely reset your expectations. That's why moments like the Hydra early in the first game worked so well. So it told you immediately this is not going to be a normal action game. And by the time God of War 3 came around, Santa Monica had basically perfected that version of the formula. The opening alone is still ridiculous. Kratos climbing Mount Olympus on the back of Gaia? fighting Poseidon while Titans and gods are tearing each other apart around you. That's the kind of shit that makes somebody who doesn't even own a PlayStation go buy a PlayStation. Trust me, because that was me. But there was also a problem starting to form underneath all that spectacle. Because once you've killed most of the Greek mythology, you destroyed Olympus, and pushed that style of game about as far as it could possibly go, where the hell do you go next? And that's where God of War eventually ran into the same problem a lot of long-running franchises do. Not that the game suddenly becomes bad, but the formula had started running out of places to go. And the next game would prove that pretty quickly. And that next game was God of War Ascension. Now, Ascension wasn't some horrible disaster. It reviewed reasonably well, it looked incredible, and underneath everything, it was still God of War. But that was kind of the problem, because after God of War 3 had Kratos literally tear his way through Olympus and bring the entire Greek saga to a massive conclusion, Ascension had nowhere to go but backward. It was a prequel. We were playing as a younger Kratos again, before most of the events we'd already experienced. And for the first time, it felt like maybe God of War wasn't getting bigger anymore. It was just doing God of War again. And I think that's an important distinction, because a franchise doesn't have to become terrible before it needs to change. Sometimes the formula still works, sometimes the game is still good, but you've already seen the magic trick. And eventually, making the bosses bigger, the kills more brutal, and Kratos somehow even angrier still isn't enough. Sony Santa Monica apparently knew that too, because after Ascension, God of War basically disappeared. And behind the scenes, the studio started asking a pretty terrifying question. What does God of War even look like without the God of War formula? And apparently, almost nothing was sacred. The Greek setting, gone. The fixed cinematic camera, gone. The traditional combat system, completely rebuilt. The Blades of Chaos? Not even Kratos' main weapon anymore. Hell, even Kratos himself was different. Older, quieter, bearded. Living in a completely different mythology. With a son. If you described all that to somebody right after God of War 3, it almost sounded like one of those reboots where you wonder, who the hell asked for this? But this is where I think God of War did something really smart. Because Santa Monica wasn't just asking, how do we modernize God of War? They were asking what parts of God of War actually needed to survive. And when we finally saw the answer at E3 in 2016, I remember being completely on board. I know some people were skeptical, but personally, I've always been pretty open to developers taking a swing like this. If you're going to bring back a franchise after years away, give me a reason for it to exist. Don't just give me God of War 3 again with prettier graphics, and watching this older Kratos walk out of the shadows, seeing this little kid standing there calling him father, and then watching the camera settle right behind Kratos' shoulder, you immediately knew, oh, we're doing something completely different now. The crazy part was, we had no idea just how different it was actually going to feel. And when God of War finally came out in 2018, it felt completely different. And I don't just mean because Kratos had a beard now. The old games were fast. You could jump, launch enemies into the air, move all over the battlefield, and the camera would pull back just to show how absolutely ridiculous everything around you was. 2018 brings the camera right behind Kratos. Suddenly, everything feels closer, slower, heavier. And honestly, that's one of the things I still love about the new combat. When Kratos swings that Leviathan axe, you feel that shit. Throwing it across the room, hearing it bury into something, and then holding out your hand and watching that thing fly straight back at you, that never really got old. But you also feel Kratos himself differently. This isn't the guy flying around the screen with the Blades of Chaos anymore. He's grounded. Every step has weight. Every hit has weight. And there are definitely things I miss because of that. I miss being able to jump. I miss some of that verticality, which I also think that's part of the reason I'm excited for God of War Laufey, because I think they're trying to bring some of that back. I miss those moments when the camera would pull halfway across the damn map because God of War wanted to show you something enormous. But I understand the trade-off that they were making, because the camera wasn't supposed to be watching Kratos anymore. It was supposed to be with him. And that's probably the biggest change 2018 made. The The entire game is presented as one continuous shot. No traditional camera cuts, no jumping away from Kratos to show you something happening somewhere else. For basically the entire journey, you're with him. And that completely changes the way the story feels, because this time, God of War wasn't really about Kratos taking down another pantheon. It was about a father and his son, trying to take a dead mother's ashes to the highest peak that they could find. That's it. That's the journey. And as a parent, the side of the story hit me a completely different way, because Kratos clearly loves Atreus. He just is really shit at showing it. He doesn't know how to talk to him. He doesn't know how to comfort him. Half the time he barely knows how to call him anything other than boy. I don't have a deep voice like that, I'm sorry. and underneath all that is something Atreus doesn't fully understand yet. Kratos isn't just trying to teach this kid how to survive. He's terrified that Atreus is going to become him. That's where I think the new version of Kratos started becoming so much more interesting, because old Kratos was defined by his anger. He'd been betrayed, he'd lost everything, and his answer to basically every problem was kill whoever caused it. But now we're watching that same guy after he's already seen where that road ends. So when Kratos tells Atreus to control his anger, we know what happens when he doesn't. When he tells him not to become consumed by vengeance, we've already played those games. And that's why I don't think this version of Kratos works nearly as well without the old one. The Greek games didn't become irrelevant when God of War reinvented itself. If anything, they made the story possible. And then, about halfway through the game, Santa Monica found one perfect way to bring those two versions of Kratos together. And if you play this without having it spoiled for you, you already know exactly what I'm going with this. So Kratos realizes he needs a weapon that can survive the cold of Helheim. And there's only one problem. The weapon he needs is something he spent this entire new life trying to leave behind. So he gets in the boat, goes back home, walks underneath the floor, and pulls out the Blades of Chaos. And man, what a moment. I genuinely didn't expect them to come back. The game had spent so much time teaching me that this completely new version of God of War that I accept the Leviathan axe as the new weapon now. And then you see those change and holy sh**. But what makes that scene so good isn't just nostalgia, because bringing the blades back would have been incredibly easy for fan service. Hey, remember these? You love these in the old games. Instead, Kratos looked at them like they're something he wished he could forget. Because to us, the Blades of Chaos were iconic. They're God of War. But to Kratos, they're a reminder of basically everything he's ashamed of. And I think this is the moment where Santa Monica proves that they actually understood how to reinvent the franchise. They didn't erase old God of War to make room for the new one. They made the old games matter even more. Everything Kratos did in Greece is still there. All that anger, all the violence, his family, Ares, Zeus, Athena, everything. He just spent years trying to bury it. Literally in this case. And now he's forced to pick it up because his son needs them. That's such a different use of the blades than anything we had seen before. Young Kratos used them because he wanted revenge. Older Kratos picks them up because he's trying to save his kid. And then the game actually lets you use them again. You spent hours getting accustomed to this slower, heavier style of combat, and boom, and suddenly Kratos whips out these chains, and you get this little taste of the character that you remembered. Not exactly the same, but it shouldn't be. But enough of that. You're sitting there thinking, there he f***ing is. And that's the balance I think God of War found that so many reboots struggle with. It wasn't afraid to change, but it also wasn't embarrassed by what came before. And by the end of 2018, it was pretty clear that this experiment had worked. The bigger question now was whether they could do it again, because reinventing God of War once, impressive. Proving this version of God of War has somewhere to go after that, that's where Ragnarok comes in. And when God of War Ragnarok came around, Santa Monica had a completely different problem. They didn't need to prove this new version of God of War could work anymore. They already had done that. Now they had to take everything that worked in 2018 and actually build on it. And personally, I think this is where the two eras of God of War really started blending together. Kratos is still older, he's still more controlled, the combat still has that heavy grounded feeling, and the relationship between Kratos and Atreus is still at the center of everything. But now, Kratos has the Leviathan axe, he has the Blades of Chaos. Eventually, he gets the Jomnir's spear, and you're switching between these weapons, chaining abilities together, fighting bigger enemies, and then it starts feeling like Santa Monica realized, okay, we don't have to choose between the old God of War and the new God of War anymore. We can take pieces of both, and the same thing happens with Kratos. Because Ragnarok isn't really asking whether Kratos can control his anger anymore. We've already watched him learn that. Now it's asking something harder. Can Kratos actually change who he believes he is? Because this dude has spent basically his entire life believing he's a monster. And why wouldn't he? We've seen this shit he's done. But Atreus doesn't see that version of him. And slowly, Kratos starts realizing that maybe his past doesn't have to decide who he becomes next. And that's what makes older Kratos work so well for me. He's not interesting because Santa Monica suddenly decided to make him deeper. He's interesting because we remember the guy that he used to be. You need that contrast. You need that Kratos who would solve practically every problem by ripping somebody's head off for a moment like this to actually mean something. And that's why I don't really look at old God of War and new God of War as competitors. If you force me to pick, there are absolutely things I still miss from the older games. Like, I miss that speed, I miss the jumping, I miss the verticality, and I really miss some of those absolutely ridiculous boss fights. Again, where the camera pulls way back and, you know, the bosses are like, you know, 2-3 stories tall and you're like, what the hell am I fighting? Like, the newer games, like, they're great, but they're much more grounded. And sometimes maybe too grounded for me. But what we gained was a version of Kratos that could actually grow. And somehow Santa Monica managed to do that without completely sanding away the character that we already knew. Because every once in a while, you still see him, the anger comes back, the blades come out, Kratos reminds you exactly what he's capable of. It's just that now he gets to choose what he does with it. And that, I think, is the real reason that this reboot worked. And I think that's ultimately why God of War survived changing almost everything. Because changing itself isn't what kills a franchise. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot since making the Assassin's Creed video. Both franchises reached a point where the old formula couldn't keep going forever. Both changed their combat, both changed their worlds, both changed the way that you explore them, and both became almost unrecognizable compared to where they were before. But God of War did something that I think is really hard to pull off. It changed the formula without pretending the old formula was a mistake. The Greek games still matter, young Kratos still matters, and all the ridiculous violence and spectacle still matters. Hell, the reason older Kratos has any emotional weight at all is because we remember the psychopath. When he tells Atreus that they need to be better, we know exactly what he means and where he came from. We've seen worse. We were worse. And maybe that's the difference, because God of War didn't replace Kratos. It let him grow up. In a weird way, I think the franchise grew up with him. The kid, or in my case, the guy who bought a PS3 because he saw Poseidon getting absolutely destroyed on YouTube, is older now too. The things I appreciate about these games have changed. I can still look at God of War 3 and think, holy shit, this is awesome. But now I can also appreciate a quiet conversation between Kratos and his son on a boat. And somehow, both of those things belong in God of War. Now, that doesn't mean I want the series to stay exactly this way forever. I've already said I miss some of the speed and jumping and verticality and those enormous moments where God of War just completely loses its shit. So whatever comes next, I'd actually love to see Santa Monica keep pushing that balance. Keep the character development, keep the weight, keep everything that they've learned from this new era. But don't be afraid to let God of War get a little ridiculous again. Because if there's one thing that this franchise has proven, it's that changing isn't the dangerous part. Forgetting why people cared in the first place is. And God of War never really forgot. And before I go, seriously, thank you for watching. I'm going all in on these longer gaming documentaries now, and every week I'm trying to make the next one better than the last. So So if you enjoyed this one, there's actually a perfect video to watch next. I recently looked at Assassin's Creed, which went through its own massive old versus new transformation, but with a very different reaction from its fans. And if you're here for nostalgia, I also just covered an entire story on EA Big and what happened to one of the coolest brands EA ever had. Both are on the channel, and I'll have another gaming story for you next Thursday. I'll see you then.